Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 4-game college basketball slate and a big 7-game NBA slate for you. Before I get started though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? We're going to do the college basketball slate first, so we're going to go through each game. We have 4 games here. These 4 games have 3 games with 145 totals or higher and 1 low scoring game with 126 point total. That said, the 3 games that are high scoring also have 9-point spreads or better, with Arizona being the 18-point favorite over Oregon State and Gonzaga being the closest at -9 versus San Francisco. The SMU UNT game is the one game that has a tight spread at 1.5 points, but also has a total of only 126 total points. So it's a good 30 points lower than most of the other games. So it is interesting though. We should have some potential here for fantasy output. However, there is not much value, so do be aware of that. I am also going to note that for the UNT North Texas team, they have 2 guys that are questionable in Reuben Jones and John Buggs, but they are both expected back today after missing several games. So do keep that in mind. So we're going to start by looking at this SMU UNT game, and we're going to start by looking at SMU. They are favored by a point. Here, they are also the better offensive team, though they aren't quite as good of a defense as North Texas, but they also are up-tempo team, whereas North Texas likes to slow it down. Looking at this particular team, we do have 2 players that we think are viable today, one being Chuck Harris. Now, he's probably one of the better players on the slate in general, though he does carry some risk in this game as it is a low-scoring defensive game, and so I don't expect him to have his super high ceiling, but he's got a pretty good floor as well as he's around. Even though he's had a couple bad games lately, he should get in the 24 to 34 range today. Though he does need 28 fantasy points to pay off, so he's kind of a risky play, but he is an option. Um, Other than him, Jalen Smith comes in as a kind of a risky Hail Mary value play. He definitely carries a lot of risk, but he's been playing a decent amount of minutes, around 20 most games, and he's being able to get into the double digit in fantasy output. So I have him in a 10 to 20 range. Obviously, he does need 16 fantasy points at this price point. So he definitely carries some risk there. Looking at North Texas, they have 2 guys as well that I think are viable today, but they do carry some risk as well. First being Jason Edwards for North Texas. He has a range of 18 to 30 today. He does need 24 to pay off. So he's actually not a terrible play, as he's been over 20 fantasy points quite a bit lately, which definitely gives him potential. And he has had some rare big games. Though again, they slow the game down, so they're not going to play at a super fast pace. The other guy to look at here is Rondell Walker at just $4,000. He plays a good amount of minutes most games, and that gives him some potential, but he still has a pretty low floor. However, there's not too many guys in the 4,000 price range today that have the likelihood of getting double-digit fantasy output. So even though he hadn't played in a ton of games so far this season, he is playing pretty good amount of minutes, and so that does give him some potential today. As far as value plays goes, he's one of only 3 that I really like at all, so that's definitely in play. Looking at San Francisco Gonzaga game, this has the highest total, 151 points, and both these teams do have pretty good defenses, so that is a concern here. And it is a 9-point spread in Gonzaga's favor, but I do think San Francisco will score a decent amount of points in this one, and both these teams play at a fast pace, so it definitely has that upside for high scoring. Looking at that, we're going to look at, excuse me, Magbo for San Francisco. Now, he carries a lot of upside in this matchup as he's had a seriously high ceiling. He's been having some monster games. However, in the games that they've lost, he's had a little bit more trouble, and he hasn't had quite as good games. And a couple of the games that they won, they were close. He also did not do particularly well. So that is a little bit of a concern. And he also just has a random where he doesn't play a ton of minutes because of blowouts, stuff like that. But overall, his price is super high, which definitely makes it hard to roster him today. But he is capable of a huge game here, so he's definitely worth a look. Looking at Malik Thomas for them as well. Now, Malik has a pretty good ceiling at around 30 fantasy points, though his floor is a little bit lower than I'd like at this price point, but he does need 24 fantasy points to pay off, and he's been playing pretty well. Again, he's going to be it's a little bit of a concern because his weaker games are against, good teams, and this is definitely going to be a tough matchup, but both teams should score some points, so they're definitely in play. Looking at Gonzaga here, now they also feel a little bit pricey today, and I actually think that they're probably riskier than most of the teams on the slate because San Francisco does play a tough defense. But I do think Watson has some potential today as he's played pretty well lately, and he has a pretty high ceiling. Again, his floor is a little bit lower than I'd like for this matchup, but he's definitely capable, and his price, though, being high, still gives him some opportunity here. Graham Ike is also in play for them, though he does carry some risk. He's had some really low floor games, and his minutes have been a little bit inconsistent due to foul situations and stuff like that. But if he can stay on the floor, he's definitely capable of having a solid game. I have his range in the 16 to 40 range, which is pretty wild, but his minutes due to fouls and things like that have really affected his play. Nolan Hickman is a very borderline play as well today, so I didn't include him in the match write up, but he was very close to being in it. Looking at Arizona State Oregon, this game does feature a 10-point spread for Oregon's favor, and it does have a pretty high total at almost 150 points. Both these teams are pretty average in pace of play and offense and defense, excuse me. However, the offense is where it changes. Oregon is a lot better offensively than Arizona State, and Arizona State is slightly better defensively than Oregon is, but I still think Oregon will win the game. Arizona State's lack of good offense is going to hurt this team. But for Arizona State, we do have a couple guys that I think are viable today. Frankie Collins being one of them. He's their best player. He's played the most consistent on the season. He does have a low floor at around 23 fantasy points, but he should be able to get in the 23 to 44 range. And if they can keep it close, then he has the opportunity to eclipse the 30 fantasy points he needs to pay off here. Looking at Neal for them as well, he's a little bit riskier, but he has a similar floor to Collins. His ceiling, though, just is not as high, which does limit his potential today. But he is a little bit cheaper, and he definitely has some utility on the slate. Not only that, but he can play guard or forward. And if you had $6,900 left over, he's one of the better options in that price range when it comes to the slate. So he'd definitely be in play if he was a utility spot. Looking at Oregon, this is where it starts to get a little bit better for the slate, as it's pretty rough at this point. But looking at Oregon, we do have a couple players that have some viability today. One being Cosinard, who's been really solid for them. Again, he does have a lower floor than I like at his price point, but he's a little bit safer than Collins is on Arizona State, as he has a 25 to 36 range. He does need 30 to pay off today, but I think he's capable of that. And he's had some good games lately, though his floor again has been lower than I'd like. Looking at Dante, now he is a core play for me today, and he's strictly a core play because he's been hurt most of the season. He played the first game of the year, didn't play again until 3 games ago, and then he had to ramp up his minutes the first 2 games, so he was rather limited there. But in the 2 games he's played a full complement of minutes, he's had 49 or more fantasy points. And while that is risky on this particular slate, he definitely is in a favorable matchup, and he's got a good upside. Not only that, he's got double-double potential, and there's really just not many players that are in favorable matchups in that position today, so he becomes a core play as a result. So I do really like him today. He's got a lot of potential, and he's worth a look. Looking at Arizona versus Oregon State, this game also carries 150-point total, but Arizona is favored to win this game by 18. Arizona is a good offense, defense, and pace team, and Oregon State is not. They're one of the worst defenses in the country. Oregon State is also one of the worst offenses, and then they also play a mid-level pace, so they're not super slow but not super fast. I expect Arizona to dominate this game, and they've got a lot of opportunity here from a fantasy perspective, though they do carry some risk with the blow-up potential here. But Caleb Love is a core play. He's priced up, but he is a viable option on the slate, and he's had some really solid games. Really, the big risk here is he doesn't shoot the ball well, and then they blow them out, and he doesn't get enough minutes to really pay off. But I don't think that's too much of a risk today on this kind of crazy slate where there's not much value available. So he is a core play as a result of that. Ballo is also in play for Arizona. He's played pretty well lately, which gives him a lot of potential. He's got a 24 to 38 range. He's got a high ceiling, and he only needs 28 fantasy points to pay off. He is very close to being considered a core play. However, he's had some, 22 fantasy point games lately, which is a little bit of a concern. So I didn't think he was a must play by that stretch. But he's definitely in play. Looking at Larson, he's a little bit riskier than Ballo, but he definitely has some potential today. His ceiling's a little bit lower, but and so is his floor, but he's a little bit cheaper as well. He needs 26 fantasy points to pay off here, and his range is 21 to 32. Definitely carries a little bit of risk. And then we're going to look at Lewis for them. as well for KJ Lewis. Now he comes off and doesn't play a ton of minutes most of the time, but he should get a few extra minutes in this game as it should be a little bit lopsided. And he's managed to score over 10 fantasy points in most games this season. Obviously, we're kind of scraping the barrel. He also has some random 20 fantasy point games. So he is a Hail Mary play, but he definitely has that capability to score over 20 fantasy points. And it is priced with not much value. And the plus matchup here, he's definitely in play. And so he's worth a look. As for Oregon State, there's really nothing to like about this team. They are overpriced and they don't have a lot of potential in this game. Pope and Beledu both have some upside, but they're definitely too expensive to be worth a look. Akano also has a little bit of upside, but one thing I also note about this team is they've been messing with their starting lineup a lot, trying to figure out things that work, and this is a really rough matchup for them. So overall, that's what I like for college basketball. Hopefully, everybody does well. The value again is super limited, so you gotta have to take some risk, but it is a potentially good slate for people. So let's look at the NBA game slate here. We have a 7 game slate, and we do have a decent amount of injuries today, so let's go ahead and get into that. For the 76ers, Harris is questionable. Melton and Covington are out. For the Pacers, Smith is questionable, and Halliburton is out. For the Wizards, Livers is questionable. For the Heat, Love is questionable. For the Timberwolves, Conley is questionable. And for the Nets, Cam Johnson is questionable. Simmons and Sharp are out. For the Knicks, Hartenstein is questionable, and Robinson is out. For the Warriors, Paul, Moody, and Payton are out. For the Bulls, Levine and Craig are both out. For the Lakers, LeBron and Davis are questionable, and Reddish and Vincent are out. The big questions to pay attention to for this slate are definitely with the Lakers, with LeBron and Davis. If they were to miss, then we would get a big boost from some of the Lakers' value plays. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But for overall, we do have some good plays on the slate at this point. So we're just going to start with our core plays and Lauri Markkanen and Joel Embiid. Markkanen has been pretty good throughout the season, and he's had a lot of good upside games. The last 2 games have been less than stellar, but I think that the matchups there against the Pelicans was a little bit tougher. He didn't shoot the ball well, didn't get a lot of rebounds, and that really hurt his fantasy output. However, this is a great matchup against Washington. If you needed to play anybody to get back on track, then Washington's the way to go. They're playing awful defensively, and he should have a pretty awesome big game here. And so he is a core play. Joel Embiid has absolutely been phenomenal throughout the season. Looking at his season, he's only had 3 games under 54 fantasy points. Now, he does need 58 fantasy points to pay off here, which is a little bit tougher for him, but he's looking like a really solid play. Last game, he also scored 105 fantasy points. He should be able to get a double-double in this one, as Indiana is going to run the ball a lot, and they're not going to have a lot of defensive aspect. He's averaged 68 fantasy points against Indiana this season. Now, they do have Siakam now, so that does change it up a little bit, but Embiid is matchup proof, and he has a lot of potential here. We have a couple other guys that are very borderline core plays, and one of them being Colin Sexton for Utah. He's been over 34 fantasy points, which is what he needs today, and he needs 33 today, but he's been over 34 fantasy points in 8 of the last 9 games. He's played absolutely great basketball. His minutes have been a little bit inconsistent, but he's still managing to put up big numbers. So as long as he's playing like this, he's definitely worth a look. Though at some point, you got to feel like it's going to come off, but this is one of the easiest matchups he could have, so I don't think it'll be today. Looking at Sabonis for the Sacramento Kings, in 14 of the last 16 games, he's been over 50 fantasy points. He's been very safe play for at the season. He's got a lot of upside in this matchup, and he's definitely worth a look on the slate. He's been playing very well. We have a few other good options here. DeMar DeRozan for the Bulls. He's been playing pretty good with Levine out, and he's got a lot of upside in this matchup against the Lakers. If the Lakers miss their stars, too, that would definitely give him a boost. So he's definitely worth a look, and he's priced pretty fairly here. Pascal Siakam is in play here against Philly. Now, he definitely carries a tough matchup here against Embiid and company, but he's only played 3 games so far with the Pacers, and he's ramping up his minutes. I look for him to continue to potentially get better and better and have more usage in this match today, especially with Halliburton remaining out. He should be able to get an opportunity for a double-double as he did against Denver, and he's right at the price point where I think he's a viable option on the slate, but he definitely carries some risk with the matchup. Looking at Vucevic, he's got a lot of potential in this game against the Lakers. The Lakers are not great defensively. He had 35 fantasy points last time. His usage has been up lately, though, and he's had some big monster games. Obviously, his floor is a little bit lower than we like for the price point, but he's definitely worth a consideration on the slate. We have 3 GPP only plays. All 3 of them come from Utah. Clarkson, First will be the one guy, as he's had a high ceiling and a low floor. Lately, as you can see, he's been over 50 fantasy points in a couple games, and he's been under 10 against the Pelicans. That said, he should be able to get 25 or more minutes today, and that'll give him some potential, especially against a weak team against like Washington, where he's going to have a lot of opportunity. Walker Kessler has been inconsistent, but he faces a favorable matchup, and that gives him some utility here. His price is a little bit down, which helps from its 5,000 price point, which is it's $100 cheaper. But so he needs 24 and a half fantasy points to pay off here. He is capable of that. I do think a mid 20s is probably in range. However, it's going to be difficult to say if he's going to have a bigger upper side or lower side of that. Looking at Olenek, he's also not playing a ton of minutes, but he's dirt cheap, and he definitely has some potential. He's been double-digit fantasy points a lot throughout the season. He's definitely capable of a game over 20 fantasy points, and he's nice and cheap, so he does give you some utility there, but he's definitely carrying some risk. We do have some value plays for you as well today, so let's go and look at those. Chris Dunn being the first guy to look at here. He's averaging pretty good on the season at 17 fantasy points a game. He's playing around 20 minutes most games, though he does have random bad games, but where he doesn't play as many minutes. But this is a good matchup, and I expect him to get more minutes as a result of that. I do like his upside in this matchup, and he has some potential. Though he definitely carries risk with the minutes being inconsistent. Alex Caruso is also a value play today. He definitely has played pretty well lately with Levine out. As long as Levine is out, he's going to have some utility, though he does have a low floor. He does have that blow up mentality, and he's a potential good play on the slate. Kamunga is in an interesting situation, as it looks like Draymond Green has been back the last couple of games now, but he's still managing to play a lot of minutes. It's a little surprising to see that he's playing better and better with the second unit. In the last 4 games, he's been over 34 fantasy points. I like his upside in this matchup, and he's definitely worth a look. Though he definitely carries some risk, as his price is a little higher than I'd like it to be. Then we're going to look at Patrick Williams. Oopsie. For Chicago. Now, he definitely carries some risk. He is probable today, but he definitely has some upside, as he's been playing pretty well. He does have a low floor, but he's also pretty cheap, so he's definitely worth a look, though he definitely carries a little bit of risk in this matchup. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. I hope you guys do well in these two slates. We did absolutely phenomenal yesterday. I do like the NBA slate today, especially if the Lakers have some guys out. Though that is the late game, so it might be difficult to get information on it before the slate locks. Because obviously, if LeBron was to miss, Prince, Hackamore, Vanderbilt, and Wood would all get some utility, and if they were to miss, that would open up even more. So that's really kind of the catalyst of this slate. With that said, guys, thank you again for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.